Hello, everybody. My name is George Demacopoulos, along with Aristotle Papanikolaou. I'm the co-director of the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham. Today, you're tuning in for one of our webinars that we do frequently. You can find everything you want to know about the center at www.fordham.edu/orthodoxy or on our popular public-facing page called publicorthodoxy.org, where we have links to all of our video content as well as our online magazine. Today, I have with me Matthew Sarkisian and Jesse Arlen, who have just published this fabulous new book. And we are going to talk to them about this the Odes of St. Nersess the Graceful. So I'm going to introduce both of them. And then I have some prepared questions that we will begin with. And then after that, if you look at the bottom of your page, there is a Q&A little box with a question mark on it. And if you would like to ask questions into the Q&A, we will try to get to some of those as well. So let me introduce our translators for you. Matthew Sarkisian holds a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, and for most of his career has worked in a small family construction and property development company in Binghamton, New York. He has no formal education in Armenian studies or classical Armenian language, but he has read a number of works on Armenia, its history and culture, and theological aspects of its Christian tradition. In recent years, being semi-retired and with a little more time on his hands, he was able to learn classical Armenian grammar through online resources, and as a hobby, started translating portions of texts written in classical Armenian. Matthew previously collaborated with Jesse Arlen, our other guest, on an annotated translation of an Armenian prayer scroll published in 2022 by the Krikor and Clara Zareb Information Center. Jesse Arlen is the director of the Krikor and Clara Zareb Information Center at the Diocese of the Armenian Church of America, Eastern, and a research fellow at the Orthodox Christian Studies Center with us at Fordham University. He earned his PhD in 2021 from UCLA with a dissertation on the life and works of the 10th century monastic writer Aniana of Narak. His studies pertaining to Eastern Christian asceticism and religious literature have appeared in a number of peer-reviewed journals, including Viator, Manuscripta, Ugoye, Armenianica, the Journal for the Society of Armenian Studies, and Revue des Études Arméniennes. He has taught classical Armenian at the University of Notre Dame and the Dumbarton Oaks Hill Museum and Manuscript Library Summer School, and teaches privately organized classes to professors, graduate students, and deacons and faithful of the church. He has also given lectures series on the Armenian historical tradition and medieval Armenian poetry at St. Nersess Armenian Seminary. Together with Matthew Sarkisian, he founded Tarkmenial Press in 2024 with the aim of providing accessible editions of classical Armenian texts, accompanied by introductions and annotated English translations. So, I have to start my first question with the thing that really jumped out to me, which is that Matthew has no formal training in classical Armenian. He is self-taught. That is not something that most people do or could do. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit how you managed to self-teach yourself something so complicated, right? It's not like picking up French or Italian, right? I mean, classical
No, it's
Armenian
not.
is very tough. So how did you go down this road?
That's a very good question. And I'll try to be concise and not waste too much time on me. a lot of hard work. I mean, yes, it's not easy. But first of all, Jesse knows this, but I don't speak Armenian. I don't speak Western Armenian or classical Armenian. My family, my father was Armenian, my mother wasn't. So in my household growing up, the only Armenian I ever heard was going to church, or when my father and uncle would talk and didn't want the kids to know what they were saying, they would talk in Armenian. So I had no idea what it meant. As far as what led me down the path, I think probably started when I took my kids to church and to Sunday school when they were growing up. In the Armenian Church, the liturgy is chanted, sung in classical Armenian. Occasionally, a priest will put some English in there, but it's all in classical Armenian, which I didn't understand. I wanted my kids to, and one of the things in the liturgy, like every service, the Lord's Prayer is recited in classical Armenian. It's recited or it's sung, and I wanted my kids to learn it. I really didn't learn it as a child because we went to a church on occasion, but not regularly. But I wanted my kids to learn it, so I taught them the classical Armenian, how to recite the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
And in doing that, I learned the alphabet. I never knew the alphabet, so I learned the alphabet. Like I said, the liturgy is all in classical Armenian, but we have a nice book that serves us in the liturgy. The first half is the Armenian text of the liturgy and the Western Armenian translation, and the second half is a phonetic transliteration of the liturgy and then an English translation. So we're able to follow along even if you don't speak the language. And I've been, had been going to church for years with my kids and looking at the left and looking at the right and wondered how they went together. So how do I get from the Higher Mare, the Lord's Prayer, to Our Father? So about 4 or 5 years ago, I started looking up some of the words online, and I found a wonderful, wonderful website that has the entire liturgy, the Armenian liturgy, in English and in Armenian. And when you click on a word, another page would come up. It has the word, its definition, and had these abbreviations below it that I didn't know what they were. And it turns out the abbreviations are the declensions or the conjugations, the nouns or the verbs. And also you can click on its usage in other parts of the liturgy. So I started looking into that and trying to figure out what those abbreviations meant. And it started coming together. Okay, that's genitive. What does genitive mean, or what is accusative? I started learning what that meant, and that was a great tool because you can see the words in usage, how it's used in the liturgy. And I think, and Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong, I think like most of the prayers in the liturgy, the grammar is very clean. It's not very complicated. I mean, some of the hymns might be more complicated, and the biblical passages are more so. But the prayers and the minor hymns are very clean grammar, so you can figure things out. So then I started tinkering with, well, let's try to translate something myself. And then the first thing I translated was, and I would say translated, I looked at the Armenian text and some English translations of one of St. Nersess's prayers, his Havatov Khostovanim, which has been translated a number of times, and looked at how he did his grammar, how the stanzas worked, and then looked at how someone else translated it. And would I say it the same way, or would I not say it the same way? And kind of learned more of the grammar that way. And then 3 years ago, I met Jesse on an online classical Armenian reading group, and I'll let Jesse take over from here because that's when our paths connected and things got rolling. So that's when things really took off for me.
Yeah, so I'd just jump in to say through the center, we were organizing a classical Armenian reading group, Kara Paryevkini, Classical Armenian and Wine, meant to create a sort of relaxed environment where people could be exposed to classical Armenian texts and authors. We would invite a scholar or a grad student working on some author or text, and we'd sort of pick a passage, share it beforehand to the group, and you could prepare it if you wanted, or just come to enjoy the person talking about it and look at some of the grammar and details. So most people were happy to just kind of view the presentation, kind of follow along and enjoy a little classical Armenian. But every single time about 2 weeks in advance of the session, I would get Matt's own translation sent to me, and every single word was parsed. uh, and often color-coded with, verbs in one color, adjectives in one color, laid out beautifully with the Armenian, the English, the literal translation, and his own more natural English rendering. And so I immediately from there thought, we could do something together. And so we sort of started collaborating at that point, and then he's just kind of really taken off.
That's really great. I mean, I just hearing you describe it, I can see a kind of engineering methodology
There was
right.
definitely that. There was like a
Yeah.
logical way to look at it, and it's worked. You've put things together, and it's like cracking a nut open, and that was a
Yeah.
challenge to do it in an organized way, to open up and see what's inside the meat inside of the nut.
Yeah, and so I've gobs of questions about the book itself, but one more before we get to it. It sounds from what you're saying that the kind of style or the quality of the language that's used in hymns like these or the liturgy more broadly is of a more simplified version, right? Than maybe like the rhetoric of a theological treatise. I mean, it's certainly that way in the Byzantine world, right, which is contemporaneous, right? The language of hymns is more easily comprehensible to an uneducated population than the language of a church father, so to speak. Is that the case in
It is
Armenian as
it
well?
is it is the case for the liturgy and the prayer book, like the Liturgy of the Hours, but these particular hymns are some of the most uh, kind of dense and complicated of
Because of the
all.
poetry.
Yes,
I see.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we jump right into that, right? So tell us about this specific project. Why did you select Saint Nersess the Graceful, and why these particular hymns?
Well, last year, 2023, as many of the Armenians in the audience would know, was the 850th anniversary since the death of Saint Nersēs Shnorhali. And from the perspective of Armenian spirituality, mystical theology, most scholars would consider him one of the two most important figures from the pre-modern Armenian literary tradition, alongside Saint Gregory of Nodegh. And St. Gregory of Nodegh has received a lot of attention in Western scholarship, kind of made more so through Pope Francis declaring him a doctor of the Universal Church in 2015. After that, before that, there were translations of his works. After that, English translations made by Abraham Terrion of most of Gregory of Nodegh's works. Conversely, with St. Nersēs Shnorhali, he has a much vaster corpus, equally significant, and yet far less of his works have been translated to English. So in fall 2022, as we were kind of looking ahead to next year and teaching this survey of medieval Armenian poetry, it really stood out how significant and pivotal a figure St. Nersēs Shnorhali is, not only from the perspective of spirituality and theology, but from the perspective of pre-modern Armenian literature and poetry in particular. He's the first author to have a vast corpus of poetry in the kind of written Armenian tradition. And most people in the church today would know him for his sharagans, a type of hymn, and some prayers that are in the services of the church. But he has many works that are not known or are no longer kind of performed. And these hymns are among those that are no longer performed regularly in the services. But in reading them and kind of discovering them and reviewing different genres in the series, I've just found them to be just, beautifully profound kind of poetic theology and multivalent theological symbolism, like you find in the works of Saint Ephrem the Syrian, Saint Simeon the New Theologian, these kind of figures. And so I kind of suggested to Matt, sort of offhand, like, wouldn't it be great if we translated, these works into English, and next year's the 850th anniversary, and next thing I know, I was getting draft translations sent to me, and it kind of
Color
took
coded.
exactly.
And just to that's Jesse's side of the story too. And my side is that I looked at one of these and in regard to something else, and it was beautiful. The imagery, the wording was beautiful. And then when Jesse was talking, he was doing his lecture series. Things came together like this was like almost like it was planned in advance that this was going to happen. I felt this all along the path that we were being guided by something that's not out of our control.
Providential, even.
Providential, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. So, okay, so he has a very large corpus, an important corpus. You mentioned that these are some of the hymns that are some of his corpus is still performed, but these fall into the category that's not. So how big, like how many odes are there that are not like so how much have you done here? Like how many more volumes could there be if you wanted to exhaust the odes of Saint Nersess?
Yeah, well, speaking just about the odes, there's over 100 ascribed to him between 102 to 116, depending on some whose authenticity is questioned. And we did 60 for the book. And these are written for the various feast days or saints' days in the calendar. So we chose, representative ones, and we based it on a collection from the 19th century put out by the Mechitores of Venice. And that was kind of the starting point, but we compared, with the critical edition, etc.
Yeah.
And there could be a second volume just of odes. And then, there's a whole other vast corpus of his works we could talk about.
Okay. You want to say something about that now?
Yeah,
No,
well,
that's well. The other thing, 60 was a reasonable number. We could have
Sure.
done 102. There have been some repetition of the feast and the themes, but 60 was a manageable number for us to do.
and to give an idea of the kind of breadth of his corpus, there's two large volumes in this series called the Armenian Classical Authors Series, which for Byzantinists is kind of like Minya's Patrologia Graeca, double column, large format. Over 2,000 pages just of St. Nersēs Shnorhali's works, one volume that's prose, one that's poetry. His prose works are very interesting. He has biblical commentaries, encyclical letters. He also has many works that he translated from Greek and from Syriac into Armenian. And this was during the medieval, Frankish Armenian Crusader state of Kilikia, when there was knowledge of Latin, Greek, Syriac among Armenian communities there. His poetic corpus is very vast, and he started writing and publishing works already in his teens. He has an epic history. He wrote Epic Versed History of Armenia, over 1,000 lines, that focuses especially on his family, the Pahlavuni clan, which could trace their descent through one branch of their lineage to St. Gregory the Illuminator.
Wow.
In the 4th century Armenian Catholicos. And that family, during the period of Cilicia, when the Catholicos was there, had over 8 members of their family were Catholicos, including Saint Nersess himself. He also wrote a poetic lament over the fall of Edessa, when the Crusader state of Edessa was captured in the 1140s. This was kind of introduced a new genre in Armenian literature, and there were many, many city laments written after this, when cities would fall or be captured, including after Jerusalem, after Salalodin, and even Constantinople in the 15th century, and all the way into the early modern period. He also was one of the first writers to write works specifically directed at the laity. and he has riddles in verse that he composed, bringing like scriptural content sort of in a more accessible form and a kind of playful form. And these are also written in an early form of what's called Michin Hayadan, Middle Armenian, kind of a literary language closer to the vernacular that people were speaking at the time. This was also an innovation that was followed by other writers after him.
This is really fascinating. Okay, so I've had the benefit of reading these, and they really are beautiful. The book has just been published, so my guess is that the majority of the audience has not read them. So maybe you want to read a couple of them just so people can get a sense for their poetic beauty.
Yeah, we'd love to. Maybe we chose a couple passages in advance, and maybe we could just read a few lines. I'll kind of read the Armenian to give people a chance to do that, and Matt could read the English, and we could say a couple things.
That sounds great.
Okay. So I want to start, Matt, with number 3 on our little list, which is Ode for Nativity Candle Lighting. So this was written for the kind of Christmas Eve service, January 5th in the Armenian calendar. So the vigil candle lighting of Nativity. So Այսօր ավետյաց Քապրիելի լրումն եղանի արգույս Մարիամ, այսօր աներփին ինամ սյան աջմամբ արլծյալ հարքանթի գուսին.
Today, the fulfillment of Gabriel's good news to the Virgin Mary comes about. Today, the timeless one's 9-month term of growth in the Virgin's womb is completed.
Matt, do you want to say something about
Well,
that?
The main feature of this ode is anaphora. There's a first word that repeats every single line of the ode, begins with Isor, today. And St. Gregory of Narek, who was 150 years prior to St. Nersēs Shnorhali, had a few odes that were what I call them Isor, today odes, and then St. Nersēs had 2 or 3 of them, and then afterwards it became a very popular way to do an ode. And Jesse could talk more about the theological implications of today. He's more versed than that.
Well, it signals to you that we're in liturgical time, basically. So I'm sure you noticed in reading these, George, they're mostly written in the present tense.
Right.
It's kind of the eternal liturgical time where time's sort of suspended, or all times are present at once together, and moves kind of seamlessly between the past events in the scriptures to the present experience of the community that's singing the odes today.
If I can say, it brings the worshiping community into the biblical text, right? Into the biblical moment. They like really bring them together that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see another one. So this one is one of the odes on the resurrection of the Lord. There were many in the book. And this one features alliteration, which was one of the few. He has so many poetic devices he uses in these poems, and it's so hard translating poetry. We weren't necessarily trying to put these into English verse. We were kind of more on the translating the sense. But alliteration was something we could produce in our English translation. So here it's the contrast between death and life. And the Armenian word for death starts with m, and life is g. And so you hear that in the English l and d. So there's this one line. Vorov mah merav mahvam gentanbuin gyank takavoriats.
By the death of the living one, death died and life reigned. Mm-hmm. So even when there was no alliteration, corresponding alliteration in the Armenian, we tried to, where we could, make it alliterative in the English, just because it's a neat feature.
Yeah, well, and let me say, that's one of the things that I really appreciated about this translation. I mean, I have read a million translations, and I've struggled to produce a couple of my own, and it's one thing, as you say, just to get the sense right, the meaning of the words, but to be able to do it poetically as well is a feat well beyond my skill. And this book does it beautifully.
Thank you.
Like reading them in English reads poetically. Like they're just so beautiful. Okay, so we already have, I think, at least one question in the Q&A, but I'm going to get to, and so those of you listening, feel free to type some questions in. I do have some that I want to get to of my own. I guess one of my questions is you've done several on a couple major feasts, the Annunciation, Nativity, Resurrection, where you do give us multiple ones. I mean, I'm a historian myself, so I'm always kind of curious about, can we date them individually? Which comes first, which comes later, right? I mean, I guess for the composition of the hymns themselves, do we have clues to be able to date them, to position them alongside one another, or do we just kind of have a kind of dump of text that we have to sort of figure out what we can?
We do have clues on some of them, and the answer to what the clue is involves one of the poetic features. 60 of the odes, 60 odes we translated, I think 40 of them were acrostics. We had the first letter of each line, or the first letter of each stanza, when joined together, forms words or phrases. And of the 40, I think 4 or 5 of them had the Catholicos of Armenia. It's like and in those cases, it was often like there was like a note that says this is Nersēs, and then in the variable the Catholicos of Armenia. And St. Nersēs became Catholicos in 1166, I think, so 7 years before he died. So at least with those 5, that's the early date of when they would have been written.
Yeah.
And apart from that, we don't know for sure when during his life he wrote all of these. My guess would be many were written over many years cyclically. So as you noticed in reading them, there's many on the same feast.
Yeah.
So this was an incredibly creative time of liturgical and hymn composition. Nersēs Shnorhali is the most prolific hymnographer in the Armenian tradition. He's responsible for adding hymns and expanding hymns as new feasts were being added in this period to write hymns for them. And these were works that are basically in addition to those that are in the canon of hymns that should be done in the Liturgy of the Hours or the Poetic. These are ones that we couldn't discern or determine exactly in what setting or what service they might have been performed in, but it would have been some gathering of the monastic community. There's indications in the text that it's primarily a monastic audience that's singing and performing these. Some gathering during the celebration of the feast. And as you know, many of these, the major feasts are celebrated over multiple days.
Right.
And in some of the manuscript titles, we even have, this tagh or hymn ode for the 4th day of Christmas, or for the 8th day of this or that, or based on the Gospel of Luke, or based on the Gospel of Mark. So it's drawn from the resurrection account, specifically John's, based on that one, or this one's based on Mark's.
So you might be able to triangulate a little bit where it fit liturgically, but not necessarily in terms of where or when in his life he composed it.
Right.
Except for the ones with the acrostic where he's been elected Catholicos and so forth. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess my next question just follows right on top of this, which is, again, with these ones that are on the same feast, right? So you open with I think 3 on the Annunciation, maybe 3 or 4 on the Nativity, and then lots on the Resurrection and Passion and so forth. So in my reading, and I'm not an expert, but on my reading of these, some of the hymns on the same feast are just completely different, right? It's they don't even read to me like they come from the same author, right? Because that's not to say they don't. I just they're really different in tone, in construction, and so forth. So do you want to maybe comment on that? It just shows his versatility, or what's going on?
I think that's a big part of it. He was incredibly creative in poetic works, and Jesse talked earlier about the corpus of some of what he did in verse, and those are very different as well. I mean, one of his most famous ones is Jesus Forti, Jesus' son. It was like a conversation about Jesus's life, and that's all in rhyming verse. But he doesn't do rhyming verse very much in these odes. I just think he was being so creative, just having fun creating these differently. I don't know if Jesse has a different thought on that, but
Yeah, the other thought is that there's we part of the problem is we with some of these is we don't know exactly how they were chanted.
Mm.
But there are different rhythms and kind of rhythms and melodies for various chants. So some of these ones that are marked as variable in the book and in the manuscripts also indicates a variable in the way you would chant it. And so some are more speeded up. There's some odes you probably notice are very short in terms of text. They probably would have been sung in a very elaborate, like melismatic way where it's long and drawn out. There's
Yeah.
other ones that are very long, like when you look at them, they would have been chanted probably much faster in
Interesting.
terms of the rhythm. And there's this kind of mark in the manuscripts, poch or pocha satsutun, which is for changing to indicate to the people chanting to change, the
The
way that
melody,
the
or
melody.
yeah,
Yeah, we don't exactly, always know exactly what all those
sure.
things meant, but we have some indications like that.
Okay. All right, great. So I'm wondering, this was my first introduction to this kind of literature, but I know a little bit about the Byzantine tradition, or even in a place like Jerusalem, where you've got Greeks, you've got Armenians, you've got Georgians, right? All kind of living together and sharing with one another. And so I'm wondering, are there hymnographic styles or prototypes that he's drawing from, right? Are there ancient things that go beyond Armenian that he's like, is he conversant with Ephraim, right? So the Syriac tradition, or he wouldn't necessarily know Romanos, but Romanos did acrostics, right? And so forth. So can you say something about whether this is really sui generis to Armenian, or is it more
Yeah, so
transcultural?
we tried our best to relate this hymn genre, first of all, with the others in the Armenian tradition. Because this one in Armenian is called tagh, but Nersess never calls them tagh. That's
Ah,
a term used by later manuscripts. He calls all of his yerk, which means song, really, and kind of even has an epic oral resonance to it. There's also shadagan, which is kind of like, I think, the Byzantine canon hymns or troparia, which
mm,
are very well delineated, where they should be in each part of the services.
yeah.
Um, there's also Gutsurt, there's Kants, there's several different genres, and these particular ones, which are called tagh, um, as a genre in Armenian, they were developed about 150 years before Saint Nersess by Saint Gregory of Nodek. And that also was monastic environment. And it's during a period when large Cenobitic monastic institutions are being founded all across Armenia, with monks sometimes in the hundreds in various monasteries, and a big expansion of monastic liturgical worship. And St. Gregory of Nodek developed this genre. Again, we don't know exactly how or where and when it would have been performed, but St. Gregory wrote about 30. And so he's the immediate precursor to these works of St. Nerses's, that there's over 100 ascribed to him. There has been some work on correlating Armenian hymn genres with those from the Byzantine tradition and also the Syriac tradition. But I think it's still an area where there's a lot more study
Okay.
that needs to be done, and we weren't able to go so deep into that in
Yeah.
our
Well, you've produced the text now that's going to inspire people, graduate students to do this for us, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so you've kind of you've hinted at this already, but I guess I want to make sure I have this right. So in the introduction, you note that these hymns would have been sung during the monastic hours, which if anybody listening doesn't know exactly what that means, this would have been a series of services that divided the day liturgically. But can you ever be more specific? I mean, I know you said for like some of the nativity hymns, it's the fourth day of the commemoration of the nativity, but that doesn't necessarily tell us when in the cycle of services throughout the day it would have been done, right? I guess I'm thinking of, are these morning prayers? Are they afternoon prayers? Are they middle of the night prayers, right? Do we have any sense for how they fit into a broader kind of liturgical context?
So we unfortunately are not given that information. And when it comes to tracing the specifics of uh, monastic practice in the Armenian tradition in particular, it's very, very difficult to answer these kind of questions.
Okay.
In part because the traditions would differ based on the monastery, and they would be oral, not written traditions in many cases. So, for example, even just some of the most basic questions about monastic practice, like rules, in the Byzantine tradition, you have typica, the foundation documents. No such thing in Armenian, or nothing
Okay.
like the rules of the Latin tradition. It was orally. For the Sharagan hymn genre, which Nersess also wrote many of those, we know exactly when they're done. With these ones, we don't, and um, I think that there would have been freedom and flexibility to kind of insert them in different ways. And related to how they're transmitted, you find these manuscripts called dagharan or gansaran, which are basically collections of odes by different authors over different periods. And his odes are found in there in the manuscripts, along with odes by other writers. So I think like it's almost like a hymn book that you could sort of um, pull out something you wanted to perform or sing on a certain service. And I even noticed in looking at the same ode in different manuscript titles, sometimes they would say for the fourth day, other times for the second day of Easter, other times for a different day. So I think those titles even are not necessarily his, but reflect maybe how a certain monastery was performing them uh, in their local practice.
And just to add on to that a little bit with regard to the titles, a lot of the manuscripts were, 16th, 17th, 18th century. There's that the scribes are reading the text and deciding themselves where they go, what feast to go to. So there's differences in their opinions. We pointed out one where there were in the critical edition there were four manuscripts or five that they used. 3 of them were like described to an ode for the Holy Trinity, and one was for the Holy Spirit. But there are no feasts for those, other than every day is a feast day for those. And we decided, looking at the text, that it would have been sung, and we thought it was a variable because of the size of it. It would have been sung for commemoration of the archangels and the heavenly hosts, just because of what the text says. So some of what even you see in the titles is someone's conjecture at a later date, not when they were written. The one example I talked about, I think the earliest manuscript was like 70 or 80 years after St. Nersess's death, and it was just St. Nersess was the title. There was no elaborate title like "Ode to the whatever."
Right.
So some of that's just conjecture on the scribe's part.
Yeah, I mean, it's all this for anyone in the audience who's not used to dealing with this sort of thing. All of the titles that we have in any of these texts are the creations of subsequent editors, right? It's just the way it works. So I want to tie a couple answers together with a follow-up question, which is that Jesse, you mentioned kind of at the beginning that the odes in this volume are largely hymns that have died out of the active liturgical tradition. But Matthew, you just mentioned that the texts you're working from are all coming from the 17th and 18th century, right? And so I guess my question is, when did they die out of the liturgical tradition? Were they still active when these were first being printed in the 17th and 18th century? Or was that already kind of an act of recovery of something that had died out?
So we do have the earliest manuscript containing one of his odes that I found in the critical edition was in the 13th century. And the 2 main manuscripts that were used are from the 14th. So it's not so much after his life. And one of them was from Sis in Cilicia, which was the seat of the Catholicos. And so you can be very confident kind of about those because, that's the same institution that he was the head of.
Right.
Just right.
So they're still using them then. Right.
Still using them then, and that's it also reassures you about the authenticity, authorship. The issue to me about usage is that these were written for a monastic audience, and unlike the other Eastern Christian traditions, there's pretty much no monastic life anymore in the Armenian Church as of the early 20th century, with the Armenian genocide and the Ottoman Empire on the one hand, and the Sovietization of the remaining side of Armenia on the other. So there would have been usage in the monastic setting and performance of these works into the 18th, 19th century. And after that, it sort of goes dark, if you will.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so all right, you tell me. Maybe I'm reading these odes incorrectly, but they appear that they do not appear to be particularly interested in exegesis per se. In my reading, they seem to be either really theological, meaning they're focused on the theological implications of a biblical event, like the Passion or the Crucifixion or the Nativity, or they are doxological, right? They are offering prayers of thanksgiving for God's intervention into history, for the lives of the saints, so forth and so on, right? So I didn't see these works I did not see these odes as works of exegesis. I saw them as a different kind of prayer almost. Am I reading those right?
I think that's a fair judgment and assessment, actually. They're more about the theological reflection on the meaning of the feast and doxology or praise, exactly as you said, than exegesis. That being said, they assume a deep knowledge of patristic exegesis of the scriptures, the way texts are correlated together, almost like festal icons or gospel manuscript illuminations, which themselves are like a a theological interpretation of the event more than, a depiction of it. Nersess did write commentaries, exegetical commentaries, but I think for the purposes here, the idea is that, it's not concerned so much with like didactic sort of explanation of things, but worship and praise.
Yeah.
And Matt, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, just along those lines is we believe they were performed in liturgical settings in the monasteries, and these were teaching monasteries where separate from the liturgy and the hours, there were its instructions, and there we would see the interpretive exegetical side, I think, than in the actual celebration. These were celebratory.
Right.
But
And the monks theoretically knew the exegesis already, right?
exactly, and this is the
Right.
chance to sort of enjoy it, kind of.
Right.
And part of our task as that we felt as translators and kind of annotators of it was to trace a lot of the scriptural references. And one of the things I'm most proud of the book is that wherever there was a reference we thought would be kind of oblique, we gave the Armenian text from the classical Armenian version of the Bible and a translation of that too, because often the specific scriptural references depended on the Armenian version of the Bible for those.
Yeah. And I should say again, for anyone who doesn't yet have the volume, although you should all go buy it, for anyone who doesn't yet have the volume, the notation, the scholarly apparatus around the odes is really spectacular, but not intimidating, meaning it's there for the scholars who know how to use it and want to use it, but it doesn't intervene for those who simply want to read the beauty of the hymns. Okay, I'm going to turn now. We've got a few questions in the chat, and I'm just going to go through a few of those. And I should have asked this question myself. So our very first one is, and this is for you, Matthew, although I think both of you could answer it. What was that initial website that had the parsing of the Divine Liturgy that inspired Matthew to dive into all of this?
That website, and it's still available, is arak29.org, ARAK29.org. And it doesn't just have the liturgy, it has some other liturgical services, and it also has the Armenian Bible. And unfortunately, with the Armenian Bible, it has the King James Version translation, which don't always correspond, but the words are all there that in a database that you can parse. So it's all arak29.org. It's a fantastic site.
Okay, great. All right, so this question is from Chris, who asks, poetry is often a very personal and personally revealing form of artistic expression. After immersing yourself in these poems, did you find that St. Nersess revealed anything about his inner life that you found surprising or noteworthy?
Mm-hmm.
That's also a good question.
Interesting question. Yeah. Nothing, I guess with these, because they're written for public performance, and they're either in the third person or the first person plural, like let us sing, let us celebrate, or we gather here today to, this kind of thing, or speaking about things that they're less personally revealing as maybe some of his other works, like Jesus' Son that Matthew spoke about, which is sort of a grappling a narration of the scriptures, but personalizing it, and it's all written in the first person singular, like the kind of confessional approach that Saint Gregory of Nodek had. I think it's there that you would find more about the kind of personal or subjective approach, where what is revealed about him is kind of his immersion in scripture and theology, and sort of writing texts that can bring the profundity and paradoxical beauty of theology and divine knowledge to people in celebration, but they're very kind of reserved about any sort of interpersonal dimensions.
Other than, I think, his personal view of Christianity is joyful. It's not mournful. It's not, I mean, obviously those are all there, but these are celebratory. These were joyful songs. And I think, and Christianity, the economy of salvation, resurrection, everything, that's joyful because of Christ. And that's expressed. And I think that's part of his inner being.
And that's an important point to emphasize, Matt. I'm glad you said that, because we often get this impression with medieval works, especially I would say in the Armenian tradition, that it's all, woe is me, penitential,
or especially medieval monastic, right? It's a double
medieval
whammy.
monastic particularly, yes. But as Matt said, yeah, these are all about celebration and festivity.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it really comes out in your rendition in English too. It's really beautiful. Okay, so the next one is from Liza, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Hello, Jesse. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for making it available in English. My question is, did you consult the clergy in the Armenian Church about some of the liturgical practices and exegetical meaning? And yeah, I mean, just tell it, like, was there any kind of working with the archdiocese or anything for this? Or is this kind of a scholar's, this is what I'm going to work on?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of both. As you know, and as some people probably know, my position here is at the diocese.
Right.
And I was actually ordained a deacon a couple months ago. And
Oh,
so,
axios, as the Greeks would
thank
say.
you. And so there's kind of an immersion in the liturgical life of the church, which really added to the richness of doing these. We did make use of all the especially published scholarship, we could find, some of which is by members of the clergy like Bishop Daniel Findikian and others. And so
Who wrote the foreword, I should add.
he did, and a very beautiful foreword.
Yeah.
So,
I might add to that is we consulted with each other all the time, and the way the collaboration on this, I think, was fantastic. In the fact that we both saw things in the works that the other one did. So the work is more than the sum of our two parts. Jesse is, has a PhD and whatnot. He saw a lot of the stuff that I didn't. I saw things in just look. One of the things, not knowing the words, I have to look up words, and I could see, okay, that word was used in this Bible passage and in this way. Okay, that's what he was thinking of when he wrote this line. So we saw different things and went back and forth and commented back and forth and put it together.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have a question from Deacon Jimmy. Was there an organized distribution of the odes to other monasteries? How might that have occurred?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad it was asked because Saint Nersess himself was the Catholicos, and as Matt mentioned, some of these were written while he was Catholicos, and this also pertains to his not just the odes but his larger hymnic corpus. Is he had the liberty to compose things and then immediately institute them in practice and diffuse it across. And this is the case for many of his hymns that made it into the canon of Sharagan, the canon of hymns that are performed to this day. That he's, again, like I said, the most prolific author of hymns that are still performed today in the services, and it's partly because he was the Catholicos and then could immediately kind of distribute them, diffuse them across the Christian world.
That's great. Okay, so a question from Susan. I look forward to reading the book. If I heard you correctly, with the loss of the use of these hymns in their monastic setting and the orality of transmission, is there any effort to reconstruct the melodies as well as the recovery and retranslations of the texts? In other words, any project underway to sort of get these back into a liturgical setting?
So that it's not in our ability to do this. We're more on the literary theological side of things. But I could mention some scholars that are kind of the people to go to for these questions. One is Haig Utigian, who's actually in Czechoslovakia, in Prague, and he's a trained classical musician, deacon in the church, writes on Armenian music, and you can find kind of articles or talks of his online about this sort of topic. Another is Adam Kerovpian, who's in Paris. He's from Constantinople, grew up there. And these are two of the people who kind of treat this issue. Part of the issue is that the medieval notation is not really decipherable. So there are notation for medieval hymns, but the precise way of reading or interpreting them that knowledge was lost. And it's not as precise a system as Western musical notation, where you can just look at it and, cite, perform it, or know exactly what it would have been. It's more like reminders to you if you already know how to do it. And there's much flexibility built in, almost like jazz, where, this is kind of the progression, but the individual chanter it wasn't so rigid as like Western notation is. It had a lot of freedom. But I'm not trained in music, and can't really say too much about that.
The question's just occurring to me now as you gave that answer. Would these hymns in a monastic setting typically have had a single chanter, or would it have been more choral with the whole monastic body singing, or do we not really know?
So I think there were multiple ways of doing it, where there could have been like a chanter and response, and then the most common is the two sides, kind of the two sides of the chancel, kind of going back and forth with each stanza.
Okay. Yeah. So it's comparable to Byzantine.
Yeah.
Okay. One final thing from the chat, Lisa, who asked the question about consulting with the clergy, congratulates you on your ordination. So
Thank you.
Okay, all right. We got one final question that just came in. I'll read it, and then I have a follow-up, and then we'll say goodbye. But I imagine it would have been nearly impossible to immerse yourselves in such a body of deep spiritual work and not have it affect you personally. What kind of effect or imprint do you feel these poems, hymns of Saint Nersess have on you?
Well, personally, for me, it's just a number of things. I've learned so much doing this. Learned so much working with Jesse. My Armenian theological knowledge has increased so much just doing this. My Christian beliefs have blossomed. I think just there's so much beauty in these things that I see things in a different light now. My Christian belief. I also think I'm a better writer. I think when you try to make something sound, and you're not writing poetry, but trying to make it sound like it could be poetry, that carries over in just how you word a normal sentence. So personally, that's a change for me.
And
Jesse, you want to add?
Yeah, just thank and give a shout out to my mom, who was the one who asked the questions.
Oh.
And say that
that.
for me too, I think Matt would kind of say the same, that there was kind of there was porous borders between the work and kind of prayer aspect, where you really you can't but turn towards prayer and praise yourself as you're reading and translating these, and yourself kind of being awed by the connections he's making and the theology of these as you're reading through them, and the meaning is being unfolded to you as you're translating through them.
Great. And then my final question is that I notice that this is volume 2 in the sources from the Armenian Christian tradition published by the Zorab Information Center. Can you tell us more about the series and future volumes that might be in the works?
Yeah, so the series, the first volume was this Armenian prayer scroll, which Matt mentioned, which we had just kind of published online as a sort of experiment and our kind of first project together. And there was such good response from that. And immediately people were like, you have to print this, you have to print this. So we're formatting that now to be released as a book. And then we have several ideas for future volumes to do together. We started this press, and the books are available, in the US through Armenian booksellers. They're also available via Amazon marketplaces in anywhere throughout the world that Amazon sells, like in Europe, people can get it or whatever. And the idea was that we wanted, it's so hard to access classical Armenian texts, either the text or the translation, if you're not connected with a university library.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to produce books, and we hope we can publish other people's books too, not just our work, but to be able to get works out there that are, like you said, it felt so good for you to say that, of high scholarly standards, but not intimidating and very
Right.
accessible to people, and at a price that you're not going to break the bank, by buying this book, unlike from some academic publishers.
No, and this is the thing. I mean, of the early Christian texts, there are a lot of so this is a medieval text, but of the early Christian patristic corpus, right? There are a lot of different series out there that publish them, but usually you end up with one of two things. You either get a kind of translation that has virtually no scholarly apparatus and it's affordable, or you get one with a scholarly apparatus that is completely and utterly unaffordable.
Mhm.
Right. And this, I think you're really finding a nice sweet spot here. And you're really to be commended for doing it.
Thank you.
So I think that wraps it up. Here's the book. Everybody go, beautiful cover, well made, right? Really, it's really great. I loved reading this. I'm gonna find a way to include some of these in some of my classes, just so that my students get a taste of these texts. And I encourage any other scholars out there listening to this to do the same, so that these these beautiful Armenian hymns are in the access, or sort of in the hands of students. So thank you both. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank
And
you, George. And let me just thank the kind of Fordham and the Orthodox Christian Studies Center for this, because we're kind of organizing a lot of events, mostly to an Armenian audience, and it's a real pleasure to be able to do something that's more to like a broader Orthodox, in a kind of broader Orthodox venue. So thank you very much.
Yes,
thank you for saying that. And I will say, on behalf of my colleagues here at Fordham, when we say Orthodox, we think really big, right? There's no narrow boundaries there, right? So for us, it's the entire kind of Eastern Christian world. And so we love having you as part of the community here at Fordham, and we love doing things in Armenian studies. So we look forward to doing more projects like this. All right, so signing off. Thank you, everybody, and until next time, take care.
Bye.